And so in conclusion, I would just like to comment that the prebiotics as well as probiotics, they certainly do work together. As I mentioned, your prebiotic fibers literally feed those probiotics, those good bacteria. There are several potential health benefits that we have seen in the literature to support the use of these functional food ingredients, and they are considered safe. And of course, with science and nutrition, we're always looking for further investigation in certain areas. As I mentioned, an emerging area that we're seeing with the role of prebiotics is enhancing calcium absorption. So I think we'll see more about that. Some of the other areas that have some research are looking at the effects on glycemic control and lipid metabolism. So a lot of fascinating areas, but unfortunately at this time we just don't have enough sound, concrete data to support the outcomes strongly. But again, I think these are areas that we're going to see further research, because as technology advances, we're able to better understand the role of the intestinal microflora, and we're better able to identify the various potential effects specifically within these unique ingredients. So again, I think it's just going to be more time before we see more supportive data in other areas. But again, prebiotics and probiotics are widely used and have very much the positive or potential for many health benefits.
Thank you, Yvette. That was a very interesting presentation, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did.
I have a question regarding the amount of probiotics. Whereas you identified research showing you that 4 grams of FMS had shown some benefit, can you make some recommendations regarding the amounts needed of probiotics? Such as billions or millions?
Yeah. Actually, there's a wide range out there in regards to the use of probiotics. It's a very good question. And it depends from one person to another. And I'll say a lot of the studies are possibly using anywhere from 10 million to 100 million to a billion. So the range is quite wide, to say the least. But the interesting thing to know is, it's really inversely related to what the makeup of the person's GI tract is. So if you were to suspect, obviously, if they have diarrhea or IBD or some of these compromised GI tracts, it would be safe to assume that they probably don't have the well balance or equilibrium. So those that have the lower or less amounts of pathogenic bacteria, it tends to take a less amount to see a significant increase in that balance or in the population. So what I could suggest or what I can say is that it's quite a huge range, and typically you'll see anywhere from 10 million.
Any other questions?
We'd like to know is, what do you think of using prebiotics in status post colectomy and colostomy patients to prevent loose stools?
Well, that's a common question that comes up a lot too. That's a difficult decision, and the reason that I say that is because the majority for the role of prebiotics to be effective is going to take place in the colon. Now, certainly with individuals that have had their colon removed, you've now removed the main site of where you're going to have most of the fermentation take place. Now, there is some evidence that would suggest that our intestinal tracts that we adapt, so could there be some fermentation taking place perhaps in the small bowel? There is that potential, but whether or not it's going to have as large of an effect on altering or changing the biomass to where you have maybe a thicker, let's say a stronger stool, it's difficult to say. It's very individualized, and unfortunately there isn't data or studies that are going to support that absolutely without doubt that that's going to be the case for all individuals. So it's kind of a trial and error situation. But again, the key thing is, since the colon has been removed, you're taking away that site where most of the bacteria is usually going to be proliferating.
Okay, but can you use it as a bulking agent?
You would probably be better off just using a long chain soluble fiber. Because again, the way that the prebiotics are going to work by bulking up the stool or the fecal matter is by increasing the growth of the bifidogenic bacteria. And so you're going to have less chance within the small intestine. So there might be some, but whether or not it's significant, it would be very difficult to determine. Because remember, prebiotics are not viscous, so they're not going to add the viscosity. They're not going to. The way they're going to do it is by increasing the bifidogenic bacteria.
We got another question?
I was wondering how much of the, for example, yogurt you would need daily to benefit.
The question is, how much yogurt would you need daily? And I'm assuming you want to know if that's going to increase the amount of bifidogenic bacteria within the colon?
Correct.
Well, as far as the amount, again, it's going to depend on what your overall makeup is to begin with. So there's not going to be one exact answer for everybody. Typically, yogurts are going to contain 10 to the 6 as far as the amount of bifidogenic bacteria or probiotics. So, again, if you have an individual who has problems with compromised GI tract, and again, their need is to try to increase the amount of bacteria, one of the ways certainly you could recommend is yogurt, but if you have someone with compromise, probably easier at that level, some type of probiotic-specific supplement, whether it's a capsule or a powder. One of the ways, too, is you could also add a prebiotic with the yogurt. But as far as giving an exact amount of how many yogurts it would take, unfortunately, there is no clear, exact answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I have a question about probiotics. It says in the presentation that they are live microorganisms, and I'm wondering how they're stored in capsules and powdered form, and if they are considered live microorganisms in that sort of form, how long is the storage for those, and how effective are they compared to, say, microorganisms in yogurt and fermented milk?
That's a very good question. I'll try to repeat it as best I can. The question is, with probiotics, because they're live organisms, how are, from a storage and handling situation, how are they different between a capsule and a powder and, for example, in yogurt? And basically, when you consume a probiotic that is in powder or a capsule, it has been dried. So what happens is, through the manufacturing process, they take these bacteria and they dry them, and they're basically inactive. They're not dead, just kind of at rest, is a matter of speaking. And what happens is, when you consume the capsule, or if it's a powder, you reconstitute, add it to water, it actually awakens the probiotic to make it a live microorganism. And the same thing when you swallow it. Now, when you compare that to a yogurt, the yogurt has live cultures. It's live at all times. There are some differences in regards to the value, if you will, of these different types of probiotics. Now, unfortunately, these are not regulated by the government, and so a manufacturer with probiotics, what they can tell you is how many million or billion are in the product when it's manufactured. And then what happens during the storage and handling process, for example, with yogurt, because it needs to be refrigerated at all times, it's going to be more vulnerable to the availability of those probiotics. For example, if it's sitting on the shelf and it's not, below the 40-degree temperature, and then it's, sitting in your car when you're going home, there is the likelihood that some of those bacteria are not going to survive. As well as when you look at various powders, constitute them, it's something that you would need right away. With capsules, because these probiotics are very susceptible not only to temperature, but even UV light or heat, the capsules oftentimes, what would be recommended is individual capsules that are covered usually with some type of foil that's going to protect them from light. And again, once you consume, obviously you consume them at the time that you take them, and they will certainly become effective once you swallow them. So unfortunately, probiotics are a little bit more tricky as far as the value or the actual amount that you're going to get. What's listed on the label, and there are some manufacturers that will guarantee that you will have X million by the time you consume it, and they might also you can contact them to find out how much. So did that answer your question, Lynn?
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.